Hello, this is Howard Yates, and welcome to this session on Anaplan's Power BI connector. We're going to look at a number of things, right from the basic through to possibilities. Thanks for joining. This is our agenda for today. Short introduction, and then we'll move on to what is Power BI. I suspect that most of you know more about the Anaplan connector, Anaplan rather than Power BI. So we'll just get that set up nicely, then introduce what the connector is. And then the more interesting things are really what does it open up and what can you do with it once you get it going. And we'll do that by way of a demonstration. Hopefully with the demonstration will majority of the session today, and then we'll swing back and just conclude on what so just introducing myself. So I lead Thoroughgoods planning business modeling capability. I've delivered quite a lot of solutions in both Anaplan and IBM, and indeed other technologies over the years. So Anaplan and IBM are our partners for this kind of solution, and we have a team of consultants who operate with both, benefit from having knowledge of both because a lot of the concepts are the same, and we work in a very agile, iterative way with our solutions. Fortunately, these types of application are very much sort of amenable to that kind of way of operating. We've been very flexible. Hopefully we'll see that today with the connector. So we obviously operate within a business intelligence company, which is ostensibly what Thoroughgood is. And that means that we get involved a lot with connecting technologies together, particularly with business intelligence ones, databases and reporting solutions, which is right in the kind of area what we're discussing today. So it could be and should be interesting. Cover what is the most important technology probably today, which is Power BI, because we want to get our data there. Why should we want to bother about that? Well, Power BI is Microsoft's probably only leading analytics tool, and its primary purpose is really to be able to give you understanding of data through an iterative way of exploring the data in a very sort of analytical, dimensional, interactive way. So that's what everybody sees at the front end. And behind that, first off, there is a series of calculations and logic that gets applied to the raw data to derive like metrics or filters. So it's very rich in the logic that goes behind the presentation, and then behind that again, we've actually got a very mature and sophisticated preparation stage. So that has lots of capability. It's got its own language, although it's very point and click driven, menu driven. So the language is M code, and that's delivered in a number of steps. That allows you to do things like cleanse data, meld it together from different sources, do really basic things like make the top row your headers and things like that. All about setting up the data very nicely in a properly structured way, so that all the later stages can then work very well. So once you've got that in place, it can be very flattering and get lots of analysis out of it. Now, Power BI comes two main technology components. The one that most people start with is the desktop application, so Power BI Desktop. You download that onto your from the Microsoft Store onto your local laptop, and it's absolutely free to do that. You can do your own analysis with no license implications. The way Microsoft makes money out of it is through the publishing of those reports, as it terms them, to the service, so that others are able to consume that information. Now, you could go and send a Power BI desktop file to others so that they could consume it that way, but it becomes a very sort of disconnected way of operating, and it's not the live central current thing that everybody wants. So Power BI service is very much the primary interface once you've got a mature developed solution, but people want to build things in the first instance in desktop, although they can author things in the service as well. So what is the connector? In order to do its thing, Power BI needs to be able to pull data in, and it can pull data in from a huge variety of sources. This is the list of connectors that it has. So, databases, probably the first thing they came up with, and then quite a focus on Azure being their technology. And then they've been branching out into more and more third-party type sources of data. And it's finally arrived at Anaplan. So we've got Anaplan on the right-hand side here, connector beta. And when you do connect to it, Microsoft do flag that this is actually the responsibility of Anaplan rather than they themselves. So yes, the real opportunity to mix in sources of data from lots of different places, as well as your very simple Excel and other text sources. So what does this open up then, well, assuming we've got all our data in there? Well, just thinking about it from the most obvious perspective, it makes it really easy to get your data into Power BI. So as an individual, you can author reports using Anaplan data pretty quickly. You could have done it before because it's easy to get CSV data into Power BI, but that has complications. I mean, I'm very familiar with both technologies, and you still need to be careful about what it is you're exporting and file formats and things like that to make sure that it works in exactly the way that you have. So building connections makes it a lot more controlled. So it records those activities essentially. So it's going to work in a repeatable fashion. And indeed, just creating ad hoc reports is that bit easier. That bit easier to get your Anaplan data into the cloud to the Power BI service, and therefore able to be consumed by a great many other individuals who will need to have a Power BI license, but nevertheless, that's usually much more modest kind of license amount in comparison with Anaplan. So you can sort of understand Anaplan's slight reservation about this, given that they do charge full view licenses for certain types of license that they have for their platform. So having it in Power BI then opens up those possibilities to go and integrate it, not just with the data sources, but also other Anaplan workspaces themselves, because it's not always that easy to do that. You don't want to be duplicating data. The only really way to combine it is by having it in the same workspace within Anaplan. But that will be duplication when you actually want the workspaces to be operating fairly independently. So less obviously, there's a real mechanism storing older data from your workspace. So once you've been through a past cycle, budget, reforecast, etc., and it's now 2 years old, you're thinking, well, it might be useful for reference, but its value is diminishing and will continue to diminish as time passes. So it could be a way of storing that data very quickly. So you can always pull up a quick report, do some comparison of your budget figures to actuals 2 years ago to see how good you were, whether there were any kind of systematic issues around budgeting, for example. Equally, if you have an application that essentially is a continuous process, it's not sort of cycle driven like typical plans and reforecasts are, then you can produce snapshots from your application and then see them through time. So we've done this previously with Anaplan, but into an Azure database, and it allowed the customer to see how, in their particular scenario, projects would develop. So a project will be snapshotted at intervals of every week, and you could see how information would grow on that project right through to its culmination. So it's a very nice sort of time lapse type approach So you could do that with Power BI if it's set up properly. It's worth calling out, though, that Power BI isn't really a database or even a light version of it, but you can sort of get the behavior to be similar to it. It is a query tool, so it runs a query, which is a sort of a configuration of exactly what it wants to pull, and then it stores a cache copy of that data in its own repository, and then refers to that for all the visualizations. So when you run a refresh of those queries, it drops everything that it had previously and replaces it. So this creates a problem for storing previous versions of data. So I'm going to show you the solution that I created, and it's really during the course of this preparation for this session here today that I started to learn quite a bit more about what a better approach might be. So the incremental storage mode, which is a feature in Power BI, which has been requested by many people, is now available and is something to perhaps use as a more robust method than the one that I've managed to put together to achieve broadly the same thing. So let's move on to demonstration. Introducing that. For the demonstration, I wanted to be able to produce a fairly large data set, because that's probably what's going to get the most value out of Power BI. It's good at dealing with high volume, and that's large data sets that need the most analysis, generally speaking. So it's also got quite a lot of structure to it. It's got 117 products based from a CPG company. So we're talking shampoos and deodorants and things. And each of those products has both a brand and a category, and these are the lowest levels in those hierarchies, and then they roll up through these hierarchies right to the top. So we've got these essentially analysis dimensions, which is why I've chosen it. We've also got some 31 sizes, which I haven't chosen to do anything with at this point. So let's jump into the technology. So I'm in Anaplan's new UX, although it's not so new anymore, but that's not a problem. And we can go and have a look at the data that we're working with. So I started off by loading in some what I've termed current year volumes here. So this is going to be the basis for my planning. So I've got all my SKUs with a number on the left-hand side, and you can see that it goes on for a long way, all the way down. So I wouldn't saying this is a sort of a presentation you would use necessarily. It's more to illustrate what we're working with in the demonstration. So it adds up to a lot, 103 million in the total for the year, and that's for this year. So that's my current expectation for this year, and we're going to plan for next year. And we're going to do that by taking a view on brand. So I've got current year. I'm going to make a revision at level 0, so that's the top level. So these are the main brands, the Storm, Intense, Earth Tones. And then that gets cascaded down over here. So I can change my brand, and all my sub-brands come through, and I can go and type in other numbers here just to modify it from the general brand position. And that sort of feeds back and gives me an indication of where the volumes are going to come out at. So that's for brand. Then for category, something similar, do it at the higher level and also at the detail level, and we just sort of navigate around to get to those different things. So we're going to apply those numbers to the planned volumes and get some nuances just by saying, well, what was my prior year volume? I've got a brand revision, I've got a category revision, I've got an ability to change and get my new number. So that's what this column is. And we're doing this down at a day level, so all these volumes. This is not an unrealistic scenario for a CPG company with many products, many wanting to look at the dates very, very tightly, because they're going to be quite sensitive to dates with holidays and other special days in the calendar, etc. I've also built into it means of tagging my version of data. So I've got a date field here. So if you were operating, want to say, okay, this is where we're at on the 13th. Get the idea. So it's the day of you want to take a snapshot, and then that can be passed to Power BI. So we've got the data set up. Let's have a look at Power BI. So to get this working, two parts really. There's the getting the structures for the analysis dimensions. So I've got those for brand and also category, and then that contains the sort of relationship, as you saw in the PowerPoint slide, between the lower level and its parent. So it's parent-child. Category has just a few more levels. And what I discovered with it, to get these to work, I couldn't just create an export for the dimensions. I had to go into a module to get those. So let's just illustrate that. So here we are in the kind of admin model builder zone. So I've got a module which I have created to create the relationships. It's pulled through this relationship without, and I've set up an export routine to get rid of any summaries. I just want the pure leaf level relationship, and then that comes through as an action. So I've got an action like this. So I originally set it up to run as a CSV file. I think we'd probably rename that because it's not a CSV file that gets produced, but it sort of prompts you to set it up like a CSV file. So we have each of the levels there, and similarly one for the brand. And it's these here that will become visible in Power BI. So we'll see that a bit later. And equally, we've got an export routine for the volumes. So I've just created one like this, which is just sort of a name for the kind of configuration of how I was going to do it. So I've got 2 line items and currently a plan. And it's the grid format that I've used to get the data in precisely the right shape for receiving on the Power BI side. So let's go back to Power BI. So you see all those dimensions, and then I brought them into a fact table. This is my CSV connection, and then at the top I've got the connection details with Anaplan. You can see this is the name of the view that I had, the export action, sorry, I had in Anaplan, and then I've just done a few sort of steps to tidy it up. So this is the M code I was talking about earlier, which is just really just shaping the data nicely. I've put in a load timestamp so that every time the data is refreshed, I'm going to be able to tell the date and time that it was refreshed at. I showed you the version dates that I can go and stamp my data with on the Anaplan side, so I can pull that through as well. And ultimately, yeah, that finishes up with all my data in the right format. Then on the incremental side, I've done this little workaround where I load in a live query, which is this query. So when I refresh that, that will produce the latest. And then I also load in data into a previous all table, which we'll come to in a second. And then I combine my previous all table with my latest to get to my new fresh table. So this combined table actually starts off with a combine statement, and it's just combining the two. And once it's done, it will export that data out so that it can then go and repopulate the previous all for next time. So this is my little workaround for producing an incremental set of data to store all the successive versions and their timestamps. Now, the other things I need to do is link up the fact tables with the dimension table. So this is standard Power BI functionality. Now, it did it in itself. Here we have the relationships, and you can see all my level categories need to join up. And then I've joined up my lowest level category to an attribute that I had in a module called SKU details. So let me just show you that quickly in Anaplan. So here's pulled these level 3s and level 1 brands categories from actually a dimension into a cube so that every SKU is tagged. So that table, again, is just mirrored in Power BI in here. So we now have SKU correctly described, and then the SKU table is joining up to this fact vol version using the SKU. So there's a relationship there between the SKU description field and also the SKU. So that means we're also set up dimensionally for the analysis. So having done that, I can just take it through into Power BI, and I have got the ability to use all that data from analysis. So I've got my version date timestamps up here, which will just filter, and then I can, within that particular version, I can say, well, which timestamp do I want to use? Once I've got a set of data, I can click on, say, the category, and it's going to filter my data and also filter within the brand at the same time. It shows me proportions. So these are all fairly standard things that we can use in Power BI, and which is what's attractive to us. So we obviously can't do anything like this within Anaplan itself. So that's the attraction. And to be honest, I've done something relatively token here in Power BI just to illustrate it. And then also you can get down to the SKU level. So I've just got a little table here where again I can filter by the brands and the categories, and it's going to pull back all that detail and show me the top 10 in this case, my SKUs and what the volume is. So let's just have a little look at how setting that up works. So I'm just going to go back into Power Query. So this is the part of Power BI that allows you to do the back end stuff, the pulling in the data and the sorting it out. So if I wanted to do get more data, then I can do new query here, or I can do source up here, or if I was in the other interface for Power BI, which is up here, it's the get data. So now we can access those list of connectors that you've seen before. Said that it was in the other section. Was Anaplan. So you connect, give me a warning. This is nothing to do with us. This is Anaplan. So fine. You'll see there it's a beta version. So there's scope for it to change. And also right now that it is limited to 1 GB of transfer data. So I don't know quite why this was for technical reasons and stability, or whether the general concern about being able to export large volumes of data. So then you get this connection configuration, and I think there's only 2 answers for this. You just need to know what they are. So the first one is that it's API.Anaplan. We connecting to their API service. Second one is that it's auth. So it's now contacting Anaplan and it's spotting a number of things that I have access to. And that's interesting in its own right. I actually have access to many more workspaces than this, but there's something about these are the thoroughgood ones. They're not the client ones. So they've obviously thought about the security of being able to have somebody who's not in your organization pull data from your system onto their systems easily. So I guess that's a useful protection to have. So within Thorogood, I have loads of different applications. We've been working with one that's called Special. When you expand Special, you see a list of exports. So these then point to that series of actions that we saw in Anaplan. I have, say, the grid to line item CP1, open that up, and then it will expose the run action itself. Click on that. It says, ooh, you need to type in your credentials. This is where that piece comes in. My password an inordinate number of times. That I get into the website pretty reliably. So I type my password properly, but with the with this connection string, it is not always that reliable. The Power Query side of things, I've seen sometimes it complains about credentials not being correct, but when I've refreshed it a few times and also logged in through the browser, it then goes and allows me to connect. So it doesn't always. I guess that's one of the things they're looking to improve the stability of to when they release the main thing post the beta. So anyway, that it would simply return a very basic table. I think it comes down to this sort of stage, and then you can go and build all your other structure on top of it. So that's where we're at. Okay, so let's just summarize what we've seen there. It definitely makes it, notwithstanding the connection issues, which do exist, but aren't generally too bad, but certainly are there. It is much easier to get your data across, both in terms of setting up the structures, which once they're set up, those can just move and refresh nicely, and there can be many tables, as you've seen with my simple solution there, and you can just click refresh all, and all of it will come through, and then you can start pulling through your moving data and snapshot it. So either with the technique that I demonstrated, where you flag it, or using the snapshots, or both. I could probably get more sophisticated in the way that those go, and probably could build in some functionality to delete old versions if I wanted to. But there's quite a bit of scope for storage here. This incremental aspect is that bit more difficult to deliver, and certainly took quite a bit of time for me to get it working on this solution, and had to use a bit of R code just to duplicate the data. And from my research, there is some other functionality about incremental loads, which looks more promising, and I hope to be working on that some more, and perhaps we'll do another little video just to illustrate how that goes, because my system that I've shown you today will only work with the desktop. It won't actually work on the service. So that's obviously the real goal here, is to get it so that you can go. Which reminds me, let me just show quickly how it looks on the service. Not a great surprise, really. It's broadly a copy of what we've seen already, but because you're in the service, you've got a slightly better presentation, because in the desktop, the objects are always sort of highlight, ready for editing, whereas in the service here, it is possible to have two different modes. We've got this reading mode, as they call it, and also an ability to go and edit the application further. So again, that was my line chart, and similarly the grid, just I think a little bit sharper in its presentation. Yeah, I've got Power BI running on my machine and a few other things. It's can take a little bit of time to run through, but yeah, something very, very similar to what you've already seen. I published it to my workspace, and in there, my workspace, you will see this option to refresh. Second one, you've got these options, and it's on the data source, this one here, that you can actually refresh your data. But at the moment, this is will work for the live data, but will not work in an incremental way. So that's what the goal is next, is to get a refresh here to be able to work in an incremental way. But that's how you would do it if you just wanted to do a live refresh. So yes, just working down my summary, the incremental in the cloud service, and then that's going to open up the data in your Anaplan application to larger numbers of people, and going to be able to bring in that real enhanced level of analysis through combination with other sets of data. Anyway, Thorogood does a number of marketing events around Power BI to help you understand the capability of it, not least what it calls our dashboard in a day event, which is run in conjunction with Microsoft to help you understand how to get the most out of Power BI. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I hope to show you some of the visions and extensions of our knowledge and capability of the connector in due course. Thank you.